I have the pleasure of introducing Carolyn Crowder, who's a native of Montgomery, Alabama this morning. She was the director of the film At the River that we watched on Thursday night. For those of you that did not have a chance to watch the film on Thursday, Trinity has bought a copy of the DVD, and it will be available in the church library to be checked out and watched. Carolyn earned her undergraduate degree from Auburn University, a master's degree in counseling and anthropology from Idaho State University, and a PhD from the University of Arizona. Her great love is teaching parenting classes based on the Adler-N, thank you, I knew I was gonna get that wrong model. And she wrote 3 parenting books, the first of which, titled Back Talk, was a New York Times bestseller for 15 weeks. Her dissertation was on the child rearing methods of Zapotec Indians in the remote part of Oaxaca, Mexico. I got Oaxaca. She traveled to the village 10 times in 40 years and counts those hard, long trips in the time in the village as pivotal in her life. She also attended film school at the University of Arizona and made 3 films prior to At the River: Sisters Don't Weep, Somewhere to Lay My Head, and Ruby. She served on the board of the Johnson C. Smith Seminary, and she's here today with Rod Murphy, a freelance filmmaker and the co-producer of At the River, which we had the pleasure of watching on Thursday night. Carolyn and Rod both live in Black Mountain, North Carolina, and they're working on a new film now and hope to do more in the years to come. Over the last 16 months, they've traveled to 60 different venues and churches to screen and discuss the film, and we're honored to have them here with us this morning. Please welcome Carolyn.
Thank you so much. Well, I hope most of you have seen the film Thursday night. Is that true? Yeah, good. It was a labor of love. I made the film because I was a unredeemed Southerner from Montgomery, Alabama. I went to a very conservative First Presbyterian church who soon became PCA. And I was raised just like we all were in the Deep South, if we didn't have enlightened parents. I realized when I moved to the Montreat area and to that part of North Carolina that I was surrounded by these guys who had stuck their necks out when it was really dangerous to do so. And I thought, I need to get them on tape. And that started a 7-year trip to 2 of those years were editing, 2 of the years were COVID, when we couldn't do anything. But we went all over the South. My partner here, Rod Murphy, is from up north, and he said he was raised in Boston. And he said to me, I've been in the South 17 years in Asheville. And I said, honey, that's not the South. I'm gonna take you to the South. And so now he's fallen in love with Montgomery, of all places. We're doing another film right now on Chris's hot dog stand in Montgomery, if anybody's ever been there. Chris was a Greek immigrant. He was not a bigot. He didn't understand why you should treat people differently based on color. So his little hot dog place, since the 1917 is when he opened it, he served everybody. I don't know how he got away with it in the hard days, but he's right on Dexter Avenue in Montgomery, and the Selma March came right by through there, and the bus boycott right through there, and he was there serving everybody. Isn't that something? So when I found that out, I've been going there all my life, I thought, this is a film. This is a film. So we are just now editing the Chris's film. Once again, it's a story of white people who did the right thing when it was dangerous. So that's kind of my theme. I think we should just watch this film and then take some, well, we're not gonna watch it, we're gonna watch clips. You've seen the film, clips that were not in the movie. We've got, I think, 3 of them, and then we can have some questions and stuff and discussion. Okay, Rod, you wanna do the first one? This is Mac Hart. Anybody know Mac Hart? He was in Mississippi. He was in Meridian, served there for 3 or 4 years without being admitted to the Presbytery. And this is a very poignant clip that we just couldn't find a place for it in the movie about his relationship with his father. Okay. your parents active in the Presbyterian Church?
Oh, yes.
And of what was their thinking on the racial issue?
They were as reactionary about it as southeast, as central Mississippi Presbyterian was.
So they were conservative, you say?
Yes, they were very conservative. My mother's father and mother were born just before the Civil War, grew up in Civil War, South Carolina. Sherman's troops came through their home place, and they were pretty conservative, very conservative. I wrote home and said, the race thing is heating up, and I'm probably going to have to take some stands that are public that you won't like, and I'd rather you'd hear it from me than from other sources. And I got a letter back from Mother that said, if you get this letter, you'll know that Daddy was out playing golf when I got it, and I tore it up before he could see it.
Oh, my Lord. Oh. So your dad never knew you did that, or?
Yes, of course, yes.
He found out? Yeah.
Yes.
And what was did they say anything to you about it?
Not really much. I remember one time when I was in Meridian, Daddy came. He was a great sports fan, and he came for a University of Florida football game in Jackson. And on the way home in the dark, I had I think he said, I don't know why you think the way you do. And I said, well, Daddy, you've spent your life trying to help young people mature, and I feel like I'm doing the same kind of thing. And he didn't have much to say about that. And that's probably the last visit we had.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Push came to shove for you as a minister in these very difficult days in the South, and you would preach or you would take a stand. Why did you do it?
Well, because I thought it's what God wanted, the way I understood the reading of the prophets and the teachings of Jesus and the scriptures as a whole. I felt like that was what I was called to do.
In that place and in that time, huh?
Yeah.
Wow.
And as gently as could be done in the very difficult sort of attitudes that the white people in our part of the South had about the race issue.
Do you feel that you were always different from your parents on race, or do you think it was a result of your education at Davidson and seminary? I mean, did you buy it?
I think gradually I grew into it, starting at Davidson. I remember once I had written home and said I was going to an interseminary or some sort of meeting at Johnson C. Smith College in Charlotte. And Mother wrote back something to the effect that if God should call you to be a missionary to those people, it's all right, but otherwise you don't mix and mingle.
That's the way it was, wasn't it?
Yeah.
They could send you to Africa, and that was fine.
Yeah.
But try to do something in Mississippi, and it's
Right.
another whole ball of wax.
Right.
We've got about 3 clips, and so I thought I would take a few questions between each one, or comments. Anybody want to say anything or ask me anything? Yes, over here.
So not directly related to this clip, but the movie as a whole. among friends and acquaintances of ours, you have some. Among friends and acquaintances of ours, you have some people who look back and say, that's a beautiful historical capture, and it reminds us that we live in a different world today because those people back then had a choice to make and they did.
Right.
And other people among our acquaintances say, wow, not sure how far we've moved from those decision points. And not to put words in your mouth, but out of curiosity, did you have any thoughts about the current context when you were making this beautiful movie about our heritage?
Well, insofar as I'm living in these times, I just wish we had, especially now, we had brave men and women who would tell the truth. And it would help a lot. They would speak out. We have a few politicians that are doing that, but you know, this was life and death situations. You could easily be shot in the South for doing what these ministers were doing. And it was, I think, more dangerous back then, especially in the South. So I don't know quite how to answer the question, but we could use people like this now, I think, a lot, because it's a cost. You see, Mac, what he went through, he's the sweetest guy that ever lived. And that rift with his parents, you know, that's just common. I went through that, and it's just, he just was convinced that he was doing the right thing. The seminaries helped. Union Seminary had wonderful professors who put these Southern boys, they were Southern boys, so they knew somewhat they were going into, but they girded them, and they came with full knowledge that they were going to be in trouble pretty quick, but they did it anyway. So we could use a lot more bravery today, I think, to tell the truth. Any other comments? Yes.
We have a church member who I wish he could be here. Is a member of the choir that did a wonderful presentation about his father, was a pastor in Alabama, and was coming under terrific heat. And out of the clear blue sky, he got a call one day from a guy named Allison Williams that he didn't know. Allison was our founding pastor, and Allison told him, hang in there, hang tough, we're with you. And that through the years, a couple of decades later, that's the reason he joined Trinity, because he wanted to go find the church where that guy Allison Williams was. So some of y'all know Carlton. That is just a wonderful story about his father and that loose connection with Trinity.
Mm-hmm. Good. Why don't we watch another clip? Oh, is there somebody else? Yeah?
Oh, sorry. As a storyteller, that's what you are. Do you feel like the story is only now being told? Because I didn't get this when I was growing up.
Of course not.
And there are so many stories that we need to go back and hear.
Preserve. Yeah,
And
that's right.
people tell. And I think the format of film and novels even, where you read it because you're getting the human nature of it, but also biographies, the Martin Luther King Day. Do you feel like that is a continuing need?
Yes, I do. You know, when I started out, I knew 6 ministers that I knew had done hard things around Montgomery. I knew them because they were young guys, like Tommy Engel, who's in the film. We adored him at camp. So that we met a lot, Vernon Hunter. They were our counselors at camp. And but even then, I mean, I knew them, but I didn't know what they were going through. They didn't come to camp and tell us kids what was happening in Troy, Alabama, and in places like that. So it was way more than I thought. I knew a few guys I wanted to interview, but every time I interviewed somebody, they'd say, well, you've got to get so-and-so. He was in Mississippi, you know, and it just spread. So that's why it took us so long. And because I agree with you, I think these stories need to be, if it didn't happen, in your church or in your presbytery, you don't know about this. White Southern people do not know about this. And so I thought it was very important to get the stories, you know, very important. And we've lost 15 of these guys since we interviewed them, have passed away. I did it just in the nick of time. Anything else you want to ask or say? Well, let's watch another clip that was not in the movie. Huh? Oh, this is in Denver. We've been all over the country. The furthest north is Maine, and the furthest west is Denver. And we had a panel discussion with an old friend of mine, Les Purse. He was the he was the president of Evergreen College out near Seattle, and I went to graduate school with him at Idaho State. He's in there, and then Bowie Sewell, who was in Alabama and Childersburg, and later left the ministry and it was on the law faculty at the University of Denver for years. So they're in this clip, and which is not in the film.
I've been 40 years in politics. Yeah. Take the struggle we're having in the world now between Palestinians and Israel, between Hamas and radical elements, almost sometimes to the point we can't talk about it. It's like you can't make a mistake in trying to frame how difficult that is without being whacked in the head. Well, that's what Alabama was like in 61 and 62. I sat in a session meeting, probably like the 4th or 5th week I'd been in Childersburg, and one of the members of my session, the ruling, well, you Presbyterians know what that is, you know, said, "Brother Sewell, can I ask you a question? Do you think that black people have souls?" And I'm going like, oh my God, where am I? It was like, this is a different planet. And we're living in a time when folks are on different planets. And where there isn't enough love and trust to open up and try to change and learn. It's the role uniquely of the church to provide forgiving space for change to happen. That's its role.
So he's saying the church is where you provide the space for change to happen. He was in Alabama. Bowie Sewell was from South Carolina. Like I said, later got on the law faculty at the University of Denver, left the ministry. Oh, any other comments or questions? Or yes, back there.
Thank you for putting this together. I attended it Thursday night, and my wife and I have been talking about it. Our friend Tom Farmer, who I didn't know was a minister in Greenville, Alabama in 1963, and is going to speak to that. I'm
He
looking
should have
forward
been
to
in the film.
Thank you for putting it together. I have two unrelated things. The first one that I thought was very interesting was a number of the ministers said, my people, my congregation had to know that I loved them for me to have this conversation. And I thought that was really telling. And that's hard to do.
It's real hard to do.
We have 2,000 members. I know that they love us and we love them, but it's hard to have that kind of a relationship.
Mm-hmm.
The second thing that is really divergent from that is I recommend Henry Louis Gates' special on Reconstruction, and to see historically, the question was, have we made any progress? So much progress was made in Reconstruction. In the 1920s, we had the lost cause. And personally, I feel like that's the force that's out there, is the revisionistic Let's unwind this stuff. Within 48 hours last week, diversity programs, DEI was just dismantled
Yeah.
overnight. And that's, I'm trying to take a longer view, but it feels like that's where, if there's a historical parallel. And so thank you for the work that you put together.
Anybody else want to say something? Paul Roberts is here. I want to recognize him and his wife, Nina. I was on the board at Johnson C. Smith when we started this project, and he gave us tremendous support, both of them did, to continue on. And we used to show clips at the board meetings. So that was invaluable to me. You know, just getting started, you don't know if you should do it, doing the right thing or whatever. So to have that kind of support was really important. Anybody else want to say? Yes.
Yeah, I'm 80 years old, so I lived through this.
Yeah.
And at a certain point, I grew up in South Carolina, and then went off to New Jersey to school. And it was interesting. You could see South Carolina better from that perspective. When you got away from it, you saw things you didn't see if you were living there. But what strikes me now is that there a lot of the lessons that we have learned over those years, and there have been a lot of lessons, haven't fully taken, if you will. The effort about the advanced placement classes on Black history, and the effort not to teach anything about slavery or even Jim Crow, and a lot of people think Jim Crow was worse than slavery, is an effort to basically put ourselves in a position of not recognizing an issue. You put it behind us. It allows us to be indifferent.
That's right. You're right.
And indifference, I was reading something, and George Bernard Shaw said that indifference is the worst form of, I've forgotten exactly his words, but if you can look at somebody and are just indifferent to their situation, it's just terrible. And that's kind of where we are. We don't want to have to face these questions, and they're still there.
Yes.
They're still there, and anybody who doesn't think they're there is indifferent.
Yeah. What's interesting, I was talking with Reverend Farmer, I think, or no, it was somebody else that I was talking to out in the lobby about the N-word in here. We've been having nibbles from PBS, and they are interested in me cutting it way down, taking myself out of it, and taking the N-word out of it. I have a real problem with that. There's a disclaimer at the front of the movie, deliberately put there. It's taken from Flannery O'Connor. One of her books is in the front because she uses the N-word. It's history, and it happened, and it's true. So are we so tender that we can't face that, and be honest about it? These men weren't using that word. They were repeating what was said to them. And Wallace Alston said to me, when I was talking about the N-word, he said, people need to know how vile it was. And that's part of that. So they want us to do heavy editing, but I don't know what I'm going to do about it. I just can't see that. If it happened, if it's true, why can't we hear it? Why can't we deal with it? It's ugly. It's just part of all the hatred that we all had, So anyway, anybody else want to say anything? Well, I guess, I hope not. Huh? What they say about it, yeah.
I'd like to make one more comment on that. The N-word is the least of the words. I mean, when I was growing up, there was what? Jigaboo, coon.
Yeah, all that
and
stuff.
all those others, which were
Yeah.
much more disrespectful than that.
Yeah. Anybody else? Shall we watch another clip? Oh, go ahead.
I'm interested to know about PBS being interested and that you have distributed this, I think, through a lot of presbyteries and Presbyterian churches. Is that mostly who has had access to the film? Is there a place for this to be in a film festival? How can it get out to wider audiences than the church family?
We're in a film festival early on, in a women's film festival. Where was it, in Texas or somewhere like that? Arkansas. But it's too long for most film festivals. They have 40-minute slots. And but Rod, you come up here and talk about, he's the guy that knows about distribution and stuff.
Yeah, so I guess I just want to say that I've been making films for 20-something years, and I'd never had a film that had this kind of reception. I mean, lots of times you do film festivals, and there's people go, and they're kind of excited about a film, but it doesn't mean that there's this like grassroots movement kind of thing that happened with Carolyn's film where, you know, she never asked anybody for an interview. People would come and present themselves, and then the same thing with the screenings. You'd never petitioned anyone to show it anywhere, and it's just like snowballed. So we if she doesn't want to do PBS, we can put it on Amazon through this international distributor. She's just trying to weigh her options right now, which one, and so I think that could happen sometime this spring if she wants to, but she's still trying to negotiate with PBS, and it's a whole different world now, the distribution, the way things get out there. PBS would be great because 1 million people would see it, but Amazon would be great too, and Tubi and all those kind of things. So that's probably coming, and she has a like sign-up sheet, and she'll let you know if you want to know when it's out there. You can watch it or send it to your friends or something like that. It'll probably be sometime in the spring, I'd imagine.
Website at theriverfilm.com where you can follow what's going on, and we're going to show that we put a little clip with Aaron. Is that next? Aaron did the music. He's our choir director at my wonderful Black Mountain Presbyterian Church, which is wonderful, and so he did the music for the film, and so Rod sat us down and had us talk about the music that I chose. I wanted to use the hymns that these men grew up with. So, you ready? Yeah.
Because the Psalms are meant to have a rhythmic flow and be poetic and stand on their own as like spoken word pieces almost, you know?
Right. But the melodies even, for this film, I wanted to use the hymns that some of these ministers have used all their lives. And most of the ones that are most loved are from Scotland and Ireland, and they go back as early as mid-1600s. I wanted to use the more traditional Presbyterian hymns just because it's about Presbyterian ministers' bravery. They wouldn't call themselves brave, but the things that they did that got them in trouble during the Civil Rights era. And the film's turning out also to be about what I would call Southern White Awakening, which is when you really begin to doubt what you've been taught by the culture. You have to turn your back on it or come to terms with it.
Well, I think you've selected a wide array of hymns with different evocations of where do they hit you in the mind, do they hit you in the heart, do they hit you in the gut. I generally just try to study the melody, sometimes note by note, maybe kind of forget what I know about it or where I've heard it and try to form a new relationship with the tune itself. And so quite often I'll end up reharmonizing a tune, taking some of the harmony out, and sometimes paying close attention to harmony and making sure that I get those couple of inner passing chords in there, because
it makes the difference.
Yeah, that's what really makes a great hymn, I think, are those inner voices.
Music's very important to me in this film. I would say it's equal to what's being said. And that's why I can't start the editing process of the film until I have the music, because I know what feelings I want to be drawn out of what I'm saying, and the music will reinforce that.
Also another song.
Okay. Comments or questions? Any more? Over here.
Two things, one of which is sometime in the last week or so, before I even watched your movie, I heard someone comment about race in this country is the sin of this country. And they talked about that for generations from the beginning, basically, of this country. People went and stole people and brought them here, and then they sold them. And it continued for so long. And the whole country benefited from that. It is a misnomer to think that only Southern people participated in the slave trade. That is not really true. We were obviously driving it and everything. But I thought what was so interesting on Thursday night, because I've always lived here and grew up and knew all about, in this church, they decided whether they would have black people come to this church. And that was not a problem in this church, but people left this church because of that. And I grew up in the Methodist church, but and that was the same thing in this church too. So I know all about that bit. It's just a different, Atlanta is a little bit more sophisticated, I guess, and that kind of thing. But what was interesting to me Thursday night, we had round tables here and people were eating, and I looked across and I saw a couple of people that I knew had in fact grown up in a whole nother part of this country. And I was thinking, what did they think of that? Because that was true for me. Even though I didn't grow up in Montgomery or anything, I understood all of that. And I was very lucky because my parents were, in fact, very enlightened. And so I didn't live in that culture. And the woman who worked for us, she had 11 children. One of them went to Morehouse, one of them went to Spelman, and they were active in the civil rights movement. And my mother was so supportive of that woman who worked for her. I knew all of that. I was very, very lucky in that regard. And I didn't understand that until later. You know, I got out and realized I was a unique person in that world, in this thing. Because it's like what Sadler was saying. It isn't just the N-word. It's just the way people dealt with other people. And I can remember my own experience growing up here, going to Rich's, when we had separate bathrooms and water fountains. I could not read. I don't know how it was that you knew where you were supposed to go, except it's a hand on your shoulder. It's this. It's insidious is what it was. It just went on and on and on. You didn't even have to say those words to keep it going. And that, to me, is when you've lived in it, and I wonder what the rest of the country, race defines us, but in fact, do other people understand it as deeply as people do who grew up here and feel so strongly? It's like, it bothers me so much that in our state now and other states, they do not want to teach this history to children because, quote, they might feel bad. What? You don't have to feel bad to know that it happened in your country. It just doesn't even make sense. But those kind of things are worrisome to me.
Yeah,
So,
I agree with you. Yes.
Well, equally worrisome to me is, this movie would not be accepted in a lot of churches now, a lot of Presbyterian churches now, a lot of denominations. And I've thoroughly enjoyed this movie. But what gives me pause is how, I would love to share this movie far and wide. I would love to share it amongst some of my closest lifelong friends. And when I've engaged in some of these conversations, trying to put my big toe in the pool, in the environment in which we live now, coming face to face with family, extended family and friends who would say, oh, no, that's not a problem anymore. That was history. And I'm like, no, it is. And it is really challenging. I'm not someone who looks for conflict. I don't love to stir up a good debate. But Sam's like, yeah. but to feel like how to enter into these conversations now, this is a great way to, it kind of gives us a leg up. But I think probably people in my generation would say, well, we know all that happened, but we have the Civil Rights Act. We're all good now.
Yeah.
Well, no, we're not.
No, we're not.
And we're not going to show that movie at our church. And it is really challenging. I'm sitting here thinking, how can I engage in these conversations today with people who I love and adore and respect, who would say, that doesn't really have a place today. That was a history piece. We're
done
beyond
better.
that.
Yeah, yeah.
And we're really not. There's some, rifts are formed. And it is quite challenging, I think, to have these conversations looking back, because it is still present today.
It is.
So thank you for this movie. However, I think the next step is, how do we take this and engage to make what you've done meaningful in the world that we are living in now going forward?
Yeah, that's a good point.
Because I know you don't get a lot of some churches would not invite you to
Well,
have this.
I go where I'm invited.
Yeah, I know.
I don't insist to go anywhere. I think you raise a very good point. It was important to capture the history, but now what? Yes.
Two comments. One thing that came through watching the film, which impressed me, all of those ministers were children, by and large, men at the time, of the establishment. They had a dad who played golf, probably at a country club. They had a mother who probably played bridge.
Yeah, right.
They looked preppy in retirement. They were establishment people.
Right. That's
And
why
they loved their congregation because they understood their congregation, even though they were called to lead it, and it's in a different direction, or be prophetic. And I found that important. I mean, they went to Davidson. They were children of the establishment at the time.
That's right.
Let's just be perfectly honest in every way. And that was important, which made what they did in a certain way even more courageous.
Amazing. Yeah, that's
actually.
right.
They had a lot more at risk than
Right.
a lot of people. So I
Right.
found that interesting. The other thing is, I would distribute your film on Amazon and not PBS, because you're preaching to the old choir.
Yeah. Okay. Good point.
And I love PBS, but my children do not listen or watch PBS.
I want to tell a story that most of my, when I show the film, most of my audiences have been integrated. And it always happens in those cases where we have the discussion like this. We're done. People come up, want to talk to me individually. The black folks that are there get in line, and they come up and they take my hand and they look in my eye and they say, "Thank you for this." We always thought some of those white ministers were trying to help us, but we didn't know what they were doing. And there's so much forgiveness and love that we don't deserve. So it really touches me. And I don't know, it's brought out a lot. Yes?
Betty, just so folks know where we're going, next week we'll hear about Phil Noble's story. His daughter Betty will share that with us. The following week I will share my story from Alabama, and then on the last week we will have a time to reflect on what we've learned or what we haven't learned and see where we go from here. So that's sort of the direction in which we're going in this series.
That answers some of these questions. Yeah, that's good. That's good. Yes.
film, several of the ministers mentioned individuals from the north who had come in the carpetbaggers and infiltrated their congregations, who very much wanted the status quo to remain. And I was just curious because there wasn't as much follow-up about that, but that was interesting to me.
I'm not sure exactly what you're referring to. Do you remember who the minister was? What?
Didn't they infiltrate the Presbyterian, and they were the decision makers?
Oh, yeah. In the South, Trinity Presbyterian Church was so right-wing. Yes, and my minister at First Church in Montgomery, they were both from the North. They came down here to be comfortable, you know, and they just took those churches right out of the Presbyterian Church into the PCA. Robert Strong at Trinity in Montgomery. Trinity is still there and thriving. It's PCA. Somebody, okay. Yeah, that's true. I had forgotten about it. That's a good point.
Carolyn, unfortunately, with the tone today, this becomes political because people in power are making changes in laws and so forth. What I'm weighed by is this film was historical in nature. What's happening on January 26, 2025, relative to immigrants, transgender,
right.
People who are different, people who are marginalized. Obviously, the courage that you mentioned earlier, and I just have to hold up in prayer the Episcopal priest who spoke truth to power.
Right. We were just talking about that.
Spoke truth to power.
That
And
woman,
I'm really
yeah.
weighed by that. And the vitriol against is life-threatening for her.
Yeah.
But you know what's also happening is that the support for her, I think, is actually even stronger.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't want your work to be historical alone, because it's we've been grappling with this. And one last thing is, when we had Brian Stevenson come here, I can tell you that's probably one of the best presentations I've ever had. I commend to everybody to go to Montgomery to his presentation. And it's kept me really uncomfortable for the last 3 years. And to Sadler's point, we have to be uncomfortable in this situation.
Yeah.
So thank you.
I will say that Brian Stevenson has redone Montgomery. It would be almost dead without him, and he's remarkable, and I'm so thankful he did it in Montgomery. You know, it's just wonderful in many ways, and he keeps adding to what he's done. God bless him. I mean, he's just, to do it down there, I said to my friend who's always, I call her Miss Montgomery, she's always lived in Montgomery, she knows everybody. I said, who sold him the land? How did he get started downtown? And she said, well, we had a young black mayor who sold that land to him. That's how it got started, thank goodness. Yeah, but it is really something. Okay, anybody else want to say something? Yes.
I'll be right back. Again, one more time, thank you for the movie. And one of the things I appreciated about it, you know, we're all looking for if you want to say, the bright spots in our heritage, so that collectively, at a certain level, we can just feel good that God used, you know, people in our tribe. But I appreciate your including in the movie, and if I remember right, it was more than one of the people that said, you know, there were bright spots and there were courageous individuals,
right.
But in many ways, the church was weak,
right.
silent, or absent.
That's right.
And
Wallace says that the church didn't do enough.
And so I thank you for giving us some encouragement about our past, but a little prod about being all of us being the church. Because there's a book from way back when called Mill Hands and Preachers that looks at how the Presbyterian church